A 33-year-old woman was walking home. She got stopped by a police officer who took her to a wooded area and she never made it out. If I can tell you one thing to prepare you about this case, is that you're going to be angry, and you should be. Sarah Everard was born April 1st of 1987 in York, England, and she grew up in the northeast side of the country before then moving to London in her late 20s to build a career in marketing. By 2021, she was working as a marketing executive and living in Brixton. Josh, the boyfriend that she had been with for several years, was also living in Brixton, and that was really nice for Sarah to have him there as well. Sarah has been described as a type of person that was deeply loyal to the people closest to her. She had a wide circle of people who loved her, and she loved them back just as much. March 3rd of 2021 was a Wednesday. That day, Sarah had been over at a friend's house and she left her house in the Clapham neighborhood of London around 9 p.m. to make her walk back to Brixton. The walk would have taken her around 50 minutes. It was around a 2.5-mile walk, but Sarah was an active person and she did not mind the walk. She chose well-lit streets and she even called her boyfriend Josh on her walk home to keep her company. She talked to Josh for a little bit. They made plans to see each other the following day and they hung up the phone and that was that. But Josh never heard from Sarah that night. He didn't get a text or a call letting him know that Sarah had made it home. And by the following morning, when he reached out to confirm their plans to see each other, Sarah did not respond. She also then missed a meeting at work, which was very unlike her. And slowly but surely, the people closest to Sarah realized that nobody had seen or heard from her since her walk home the previous night. That Thursday night, after complete silence from Sarah, Josh decided to call the police and loop them in because he was very worried by that point. And the Metropolitan Police launched a major investigation into her disappearance almost immediately, partly because Sarah was a young woman who was walking home at night and seemingly vanished out of nowhere, and also partly because of the CCTV footage they found. In that footage, authorities were able to see Sarah walking normally and then disappearing. She was wearing a teal-colored jacket and patterned leggings, and she was caught on camera at different points throughout her walk. The first one being at 9:15 p.m. and the last one being at 9:32 p.m. And again, in the surveillance footage, all that was seen was Sarah walking normally. There was no obvious explanation as to what happened to her and no indication of where she could have gone. But that's why it was so weird, because she was there and then she just wasn't. The investigation grew rapidly into one of the largest missing persons searches the Met had conducted in years. CCTV footage was collected and analyzed from dozens of cameras across South London, tracing Sarah's route and trying to identify a general area in which she could have disappeared from. Images of her were put out to the public, asking for anyone with possible information to come forward, and by the following week, on Monday, authorities had received over 120 tips regarding the case. The police stated that they were, quote, remaining open-minded as to all possibilities, confirming that the search for her was still a missing persons investigation and saying that they were not ruling anything out. By Tuesday, March 9th, authorities had began going door to door, questioning hundreds of people who lived in the area that Sarah walked through. They had searched the streets, fields, ponds, drains. They had followed all and any leads that were coming in, and they continued asking the public to search through any Ring doorbell or security camera footage that they may have. And then, as they were reviewing more and more footage, they noticed something, and it wasn't footage of Sarah being grabbed and taken, but instead it was a car, a specific vehicle that had been captured on multiple cameras in the area around the time that Sarah disappeared. They kept going, and then they noticed that that car had stopped at one point. The driver put the hazards on, and then a man got out of the car and approached Sarah. Sometime after, a different camera captured that same car, but this time Sarah could be seen sitting in the back seat. So weird. So they're like, what the heck is going on? Whose car is that? And more importantly, who is the man driving the car? They're able to trace the car back to a rental company and then to the driver. The driver was 48-year-old police officer named Wayne Cousins. And on March 9th, 2021, 6 days after Sarah disappeared, Wayne Cousins was arrested at his home in Deal, Kent on suspicion of kidnapping. So who was this guy? Wayne Cousins had worked with law enforcement for years, first with the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, then with Kent Police, before joining the Metropolitan Police in 2018. He was then assigned to the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, the unit responsible for guarding Parliament and foreign embassies in London, one of the most trusted roles in British police. He was married with 2 children and living in a house in Deal, Kent. To friends and neighbors, he was just a normal guy, a father, and a trusted officer. But beneath that surface, investigators were about to discover a pattern of seriously concerning behavior that had been flagged and ignored. And investigators quickly realized that the night that Sarah Everard disappeared on March 3rd, Wayne had rented that rental car specifically to use that night because he did not want to use his own vehicle for the crime that he had been planning on committing. Wayne had been planning an attack. Even if the choice of his victim was random, before even approaching Sarah on the street, before ever seeing her, he knew what he was going to do. Because something you need to know about him is that he had a reputation, a lengthy one at that. He had a history of violence and aggression and essay against women, a history that went back years, from even before he joined law enforcement and during. In the months before Sarah disappeared, Wayne Couzens had exposed himself in an act of indecent exposure on at least 3 separate occasions. On November 13th, 2020, he had pulled his bottoms down in front of a female cyclist just to expose himself, I guess, and he was on duty at the time, supposed to be working from home. The final time that he did the same thing again was just 3 days before Sarah disappeared. Again, at a McDonald's, he exposed himself to an employee and then he just went back to work. A complaint had been made to police, but it was just not acted upon. It also emerged that he had a reputation within his colleagues, within his coworkers. There were whispered warnings about how creepy he was, to the point that he had been given a nickname so crude and specific that even the officers who used it clearly understood that something was wrong with him. His nickname was the rapist. That is what his coworkers called him. He also had been reported for looking at extreme, violent, disturbing adult content. He had been reported for essay and attempted essay on many different occasions, and for a lot of those quote-unquote incidents, I don't even know what you would call them, there's so many different kind of things that he did, the victims would report it, but they didn't know who he was, so that meant they were not able to provide a name, so authorities just let it go. But the very few times that the victims were able to identify him, authorities would open up investigations into him, find nothing, and then just close them back up. The warnings had existed. There was a plethora of warnings, yet none of them had been taken seriously enough to remove him from active service. In fact, some of his coworkers even joked about his behavior. Messages between them were released of them cracking jokes back and forth about essaying women. And not only is he repulsive, but I think he's also lacking brain cells, because when authorities arrested him and questioned him about Sarah's disappearance, the story that he gave, I'm not even being funny, this is what he said. He said that he was in financial trouble and that he had hired a woman to be intimate with. They did whatever they did, but according to him, he didn't have the money to pay up. So now he owed people money, and according to him, the boss of that girl told him that now he needed to go out on the streets and find a woman who would do adult work for him as a way of paying them back the money that he owed him. And if he didn't find someone, they told him that they would come after his family. So that's what he did. This is what he said, that he went out on the streets, he found Sarah, he picked her up, delivered her to these men, and then left. And after that, he just isn't sure what happened. That was all a lie, of course, but in the investigation into him, apart from his terrifying past, investigators were able to find a piece of land that Wayne owned, which was about an hour away from where he lived. It was a place that he said he frequently visited with his family, and he did. But it was also the place where he had decided to get rid of Sarah's remains. Authorities went out to that wooded area where they found a burnt fridge on the ground, and then they also found a large builder's bag partially submerged in a stream of water. When officers opened the bag, they found charred human remains inside, and those remains were identified to be Sarah Everard's through dental records. Her cause of death was due to compression of the neck. Authorities theorized that Wayne Couzens stopped Sarah on her walk home and made up some sort of lie to get her in the back of his car. He likely told her that he was arresting her for being outside because this was in 2021 and London still had very serious rules about lockdown, and she got in his car just minutes after hanging up the phone with her boyfriend, and authorities believe that the entire kidnapping took just 5 minutes. They believe that he essayed her because of DNA of his that was found in his car. At some point, he then drove her to the land that he owned, and then it's believed that after killing her, he then placed her unclothed body in the fridge and set it up in flames. And then he returned back to his his family and acted like nothing ever happened. Come to find out, days later, he even took his wife and his 2 children on a family trip to the woods where he had burned his victim's body. News broke of this, and believe it or not, more victims, many more victims who had not known his name but recognized his face in the media, came forward with their own horrible stories about him. And people were enraged, rightfully so, because the amount of warning signs could not be more clear. And the terrible thing to think about is that if he had been punished for any of the things that he did in the past, there is a chance that Sarah would still be alive today. But because he was shown that he could pretty much do whatever he wanted and get away with it, his behavior just kept progressing more and more until eventually an innocent woman's life was brutally taken. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner at the time acknowledged publicly that the system had failed. Quote, "I recognize that the precious bond of trust that we have with the public we serve has been damaged. It is beholden upon all of us in policing to do everything we can to restore and reinforce that trust," end quote. She called it, quote, "one of the most dreadful events in the 190-year history of the Metropolitan Police Service." The Independent Office for Police Conduct then launched a formal investigation into what Wayne's colleagues knew about his behavior and failed to report. That investigation continued long after the criminal case concluded. Wayne Couzens did not put Sarah's family through a trial. It may be the only thing that he did right in this world. On June 8th, 2021, he appeared in court and pleaded guilty to kidnapping. Then on July 9th, 2021, he returned to court and pleaded guilty to murder. And get this, even though he was arrested, he was in custody before pleading guilty, he was not fired from his job until a week after he pleaded guilty. He literally still had his job and was still being paid while he was in custody. And even when he was fired, they didn't fire him because he pleaded guilty for murder. They cited the reason for firing him as, quote, "failing to live up to the standards that officers are supposed to have." You think so? The sentencing for Wayne Couzens took place over 2 days, and for the first time, the full details of what he had done to Sarah Everard were heard by the world. Prosecutor Tom Little laid out a timeline, talked about the rental car, the false arrest, the drive to Kent, the remote location, the essay, the strangulation with his police-issue belt, the burning of her body and clothing, and the builder's bag. The courtroom heard that Wayne Couzens had been, quote, "on a hunt for a young woman," that the choice of victim had been random, but the attack itself had been planned out with what the judge would later call, quote, "significant planning and premeditation," that Sarah Everard had died because a serving police officer had simply decided that she would. He had prepared for that night extensively, driving to London, which I think was around 2 hours away from his house, multiple times to scope out different locations. He had purchased fake handcuffs online, cleaning supplies, hair ties, and he made the reservation for that rental car a week in advance. It also came out that he had been using a dating profile to cheat on his wife with, in which he used a fake name. And I know you guys are probably wondering about his family, and it sounds like they were completely clueless about this dark side of him and completely unsuspecting, because I guess when he would be out doing weird things, he would just tell his wife and his family that he was working late. And they had no reason to not believe him, I guess. At his sentencing, Sarah's family read their impact statements. Her parents spoke of a daughter that they had lost forever. Her brother spoke of a sister. And those statements were not published in their entirety at the family's request because they wanted to experience and feel the grief in private. So we're not going to talk about that, but I can tell you that they said that although nothing would ever be able to bring Sarah back, knowing that her attacker was behind bars did give them some sort of relief. On September 30th of 2021, Wayne Couzens was sentenced to life. He was also sentenced an additional 19 months for his indecent exposure charges. Quote, "Sarah Everard was a wholly blameless victim of a grotesquely executed series of offenses. Notwithstanding your guilty pleas, I have seen no evidence of genuine contrition on your part, as opposed to evident self-pity and attempts by you to avoid or minimize the proper consequences of what you have done." Shocking and so sad. That's all for me today. Thank you for spending time with me and for listening to Sarah's story. I hope that you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.